Rice built the fortunes of early America, but the genius behind it was stolen from black farmers, not white planters. The official story credits wealthy landowners, yet plantation letters and sales records reveal Carolina gold was only possible because enslaved Africans brought centuries of Rice Coast knowledge, right down to the exact irrigation method. So why do their names vanish while America profits? The answers rewrite everything you thought you knew about food, ownership, and the roots of our most cherished traditions. The real story starts where textbooks end. By the 1770s, Charleston's docks bustled with shipments of Carolina gold rice, prized across the Atlantic for its flavor and quality. Behind those profits stood a system that depended on West African expertise, not the supposed ingenuity of white planters. Planter correspondence from the era makes it plain they ordered enslaved people from the so-called Rice Coast, including Senegal, Gambia, and Sierra Leone, because those communities had mastered rice cultivation long before the Americas entered the trade. Judith Carney's research exposes letters and ledgers that treat African agricultural knowledge as a commodity, something to be bought and sold, but never credited. Along the tidal rivers of the Low Country, enslaved black farmers engineered elaborate irrigation networks, wooden trunks, and dikes that harnessed the rise and fall of the tide. These were not the inventions of Charleston's elite. They were adaptations of centuries-old West African water management. The Gullah and Geechee people, whose ancestors built and maintained these fields, carried forward rice-based dishes like purloo, red rice, and okra rice, traditions that survived even as their names disappeared from the record. Charleston's wealth and the very landscape of the Low Country were shaped by black hands and minds. Yet, as Carolina gold became a symbol of Southern abundance, the story was rewritten to credit planters while erasing the intellectual labor of those who made it possible. Today, brands and restaurants profit from Low Country cuisine, but the legacy of Gullah farmers remains a footnote unless we choose to name it. Collard greens, mustard greens, and turnip greens simmered for hours with smoked or salted pork formed the backbone of many meals in the quarters. This wasn't just about flavor, this was survival. Enslaved cooks, most of them women, transformed tough forage greens and pork scraps into nourishing pots that could feed dozens. The broth left behind, known as pot liquor, was prized for its richness. In many quarters, pot liquor became the real meal, sipped straight from the bowl or shared among children when there wasn't enough meat to go around. WPA interviews from the 1930s capture elders recalling how pot liquor kept people going through lean times. One woman from Georgia remembered that they drank the pot liquor right down, and it put strength in their bones. Recipes and techniques were passed from mother to daughter, often by word of mouth, surviving even as families were torn apart. These communal pots were more than food. They were acts of care, quiet resistance, and cultural memory. While later generations would see collard greens served at Sunday dinners and church suppers, the roots of the dish trace back to those big iron pots, tended by black women whose names rarely made it into cookbooks. Today, greens appear on menus across the South, often stripped of their history. But for those who know, every bowl of pot liquor is a story of resilience and resourcefulness, carried forward through countless hands. At the heart of New Year's Day, in many black Southern homes sits a humble bowl of Hoppin' John, black-eyed peas simmered with rice and scraps of pork. Each spoonful is more than a meal, it is a ritual carried from West African ancestors who paired legumes and grains for nourishment and meaning. Black-eyed peas, first brought to the Americas by enslaved Africans, were planted in fields and garden plots, thriving even in poor soil. After emancipation, this dish took on new weight. On the first day of January, families gathered to eat Hoppin' John, believing it would bring luck, wealth, and protection in the year ahead. The peas stood for coins, the rice for abundance, and the pork for forward motion. In many communities, Elders recall watch night services at church, hours spent in prayer and song, waiting for midnight, then returning home to share the first bites of Hoppin' John as a blessing for the future. Works Progress Administration interviews and oral histories from the Carolinas and Georgia capture these memories, describing how the tradition offered hope and continuity after the upheaval of the Civil War. The ritual peaked in the decades after freedom, when Black families claimed New Year's as a time for both remembrance and renewal. Today, the dish appears on Southern restaurant menus and in glossy cookbooks, often stripped of its story. But in kitchens where the recipe is passed down by hand, Hoppin' John remains a quiet act of faith, an edible link to ancestors' survival, and the hope that each new year might bring something better. The aroma of smoke and slow-cooked meat once signaled a gathering in Black communities across the South. Before barbecue became a competition or a chain restaurant slogan, it was a craft, rooted in the skill of Black pitmasters who learned to turn whole hogs and tough cuts into feasts that could feed an entire crowd. In the 1800s, newspapers from Georgia to Texas described public barbecues where Black cooks worked through the night, tending earth-dug pits, stoking fires, and basting meat with homemade mops, long sticks wrapped in cloth, dipped in a tangy mix of vinegar, pepper, and drippings. The process was communal and grueling, often starting at sundown and ending at dawn, with pitmasters reading the fire by sight and hand, not by thermometer. Adrian Miller, a leading historian of Black barbecue, has traced these traditions in court records and local news, where the names of Black pitmasters might appear briefly, if at all. Men like Arthur Watts and untold others became legends in their counties, called on for political rallies, church anniversaries, and Emancipation Day celebrations. These cooks brought technical mastery, knowing which woods burned slow, how to keep the heat steady, and when to swab the meat so the smoke itself carried the flavor. Barbecue was more than a meal, it was a public event, a rare moment for Black families to gather, celebrate, and claim space. But as barbecue festivals grew and the food became a symbol of Southern identity, credit shifted. Today, most barbecue competitions and television shows feature white pitmasters, while the Black hands that built the tradition are rarely named. The original pit barbecue, whole hog, overnight, and communal, remains a testament to Black ingenuity, even as its history is too often left off the menu. Fried chicken in the American South was never just a dish. It was a craft shaped by the hands and palates of Black cooks long before it became a global commodity. While Scottish immigrants brought the basic method of frying chicken in fat, Black cooks, many of them enslaved women, transformed the technique. They seasoned the meat, battered it, and fried it crisp, turning simple birds into something worth saving for Sunday or special occasions. In kitchens across the South, recipes were passed down by memory, not written in books, and the best cooks guarded their secrets as closely as any trade. By the 1930s, a white gas station owner in Corbin, Kentucky, saw an opportunity. Harlan Sanders, later known as Colonel Sanders, began selling fried chicken to travelers, claiming a secret recipe of 11 herbs and spices. The story of KFC's rise is a story of branding, a white face in a white suit promising Southern authenticity. But the flavor Sanders sold was no invention. It was built on a tradition Black cooks had refined for generations, often while working in kitchens where their names were never listed on the menu. As KFC grew from a roadside cafe to a franchise empire, the profits soared. Today, KFC and other fried chicken chains bring in billions each year, trading on the taste that Black communities perfected. Yet, the faces in the ads and the stories told in company histories rarely mention the cooks who made the dish famous. The myth of the secret recipe is powerful, but the real secret is who gets credit and who gets paid. The pattern is clear. Black culinary skill created the flavor, but the profits and the story went elsewhere. The stereotype of fried chicken as soul food became a punchline, even as the chains built fortunes selling it to the world. A jar of pepper vinegar sat on nearly every table in Black Southern homes long before hot sauce became a supermarket staple. Enslaved women, faced with short seasons and unreliable rations, preserved everything they could, including okra, cucumbers, and peppers, using salt, vinegar, and thyme. The simplest recipe called for red peppers dropped into a bottle of vinegar, left to steep until the liquid stung the tongue and brightened any meal. This was more than a condiment. It was a way to stretch flavor and nutrition when choices were few. WPA interviews recall women boiling brine over wood fires, packing jars with whatever the garden or wild patch gave up, and storing them for lean months. Church bazaars and Sunday suppers became informal markets for these pickles and sauces. Women sold jars to raise money for the congregation or to support their own families. These micro-enterprises built networks of mutual aid, even as Jim Crow laws tried to shut Black women out of formal business. The pepper vinegar base, sharp, hot, and endlessly adaptable, became the DNA for later Southern hot sauces. Brands like Texas Pete and Crystal would bottle and brand the taste, but their labels never pictured the hands that first mixed the brine. The legacy of these unnamed canning women lives on in every splash of heat at the table, a quiet testament to invention born out of necessity and community. Their flavor came first. The credit, as usual, did not. Okra landed in Louisiana's kitchens by way of West Africa. Its name was King Gumbo, and that name became the root for what would soon be called gumbo. In the early 1800s, New Orleans became a crossroads as waves of Haitian refugees arrived after the Revolution of 1804. They brought with them free Black cooks, French and Spanish traditions, and a taste for melding flavors. In Black and Creole homes, cooks combined okra, rice, seafood, sausage, and whatever the garden or market offered, thickening their stews with okra or file powder from the sassafras tree. Gumbo wasn't just a dish. It was a living record of survival, migration, and adaptation. Each pot reflected a mix of African, indigenous, and European roots, simmered together over open fires and shared at crowded tables. Leah Chase, born in 1923 in New Orleans, grew up in this tradition. At Dookie Chase's restaurant, she became famous for her gumbo zerbs, a green gumbo that honored both Catholic fasting days and African ways of cooking greens. Her kitchen stood as proof that blending cultures was a strength, not a compromise. In every bowl, the story of diaspora, resilience, and creativity remained intact, even as gumbo became a symbol of Louisiana itself, often sold to tourists with little mention of the Black women who first stirred the pot. Cornbread began as survival food, hoe cakes and pone cooked on open fires, made from the cornmeal rations handed to enslaved families. The earliest recipes were simple: cornmeal, water, salt, maybe a little fat if you had it. Sweetener was rare, but by the 1950s, a new kind of cornbread showed up on grocery shelves, box mixes promising quick, fluffy results. Jiffy, Betty Crocker, and Martha White all pushed their cornbread as modern and convenient, with packaging and ads that featured white housewives and children gathered in spotless kitchens. The story of who actually invented cornbread was nowhere to be found. Instead, brands sold a version that was sweeter, softer, and closer to cake than the skillet bread Black cooks had relied on for generations. Sugar became a main ingredient, even though it rarely appeared in the original recipes. Between 1940 and 1970, advertising archives show a parade of white faces selling down-home taste, while the Black women who made cornbread a staple were left out of the picture. The box made cornbread easy, but it also erased the history and the hands that shaped it. In the 1930s in Detroit, a new kind of dessert began to circulate among Black families and on city streets. Navy beans were blended into a smooth custard and baked in a flaky crust, offering a sweet finish with a purpose. The recipe did not come from a corporate test kitchen. It came from the Nation of Islam, which saw food as both nourishment and self-determination. Vendors in crisp suits and bow ties carried boxes of pies through neighborhoods, on sidewalks and at busy intersections, building a grassroots economy that belonged to the people who made it. Selling bean pies became a way for Black Muslims to support their mosques, schools, and community programs, one slice at a time. The bean pie's rise was more than a culinary twist on sweet potato pie. It was an answer to exclusion from white-owned bakeries and restaurants. Every sale helped fund youth education and local businesses, keeping money in the community. Unlike so many food traditions that were taken and rebranded, the bean pie stayed rooted in the hands that created it. In cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York, the sight of a bean pie vendor remains a symbol of Black enterprise, an edible legacy of ownership, resilience, and pride. Chitlins were never a delicacy by choice. On plantations, enslaved families received the parts no one else wanted: pig intestines, feet, snouts. Cleaning chitlins was an ordeal that began at dawn, with elders soaking and scrubbing the meat in vinegar and salt to cut the stench. Recipes and rituals passed down in whispers. Boil them with onions, drown them in hot sauce, serve them at winter gatherings when a whole hog was butchered and nothing went to waste. In Black communities, chitlin suppers became a tradition, equal parts celebration and survival. But outside those kitchens, chitlins carried a stigma. For decades, they were mocked as poverty food, even as Black cooks turned scraps into sustenance. Now, high-end chefs boast of nose-to-tail dining, serving offal at Michelin-starred restaurants for triple-digit prices. The same cuts once ridiculed are suddenly gourmet, but the hands that made them edible rarely appear on the menu. Every year, America's favorite foods, rice dishes, fried chicken, barbecue, hot sauce, cornbread, and more, generate tens of billions of dollars in sales. Fried chicken chains alone pull in over $40 billion annually. Bottled hot sauces and pickles, rooted in Black preservation methods, add billions more dollars. Boxed cornbread mixes, once survival food, now move hundreds of millions of dollars in supermarkets. Barbecue festivals and gourmet restaurants, inspired by traditions born out of necessity, rake in millions of dollars from tickets and trendy menus. But in the very counties and cities where these dishes began, the typical Black household brings home $50,000 a year, often less in the Deep South. The numbers speak for themselves. The wealth built on Black foodways rarely finds its way back to the communities that created them. American kitchens still profit from recipes born of Black innovation, yet the hands that shape them often go unnamed. Today, food brands and restaurants build fortunes on these traditions, while Black chefs and communities fight for recognition. Until credit matches contribution, the story remains unfinished. Every meal is a chance to remember whose genius fills our plates. What names will we speak the next time we taste history? Join the conversation below.